right, the party continues. I see the room is populating. People are being pulled back into the session. And we've been through some great looks at the big picture for our first two sessions, which really set the stage for the rest of the day. We have Team Rise joining us. Most of Team Rise, I guess I'll say. So Leah and Renee and Michelle are available. We're watching the chat as well, so be active there. And you can use the chat space as well as the QA space to drop in your comments. But I want to make sure I give them all these voices of Team Rise the full 45 or most of it as they can. So I'm going to bow out and let the team of Leah, Renee, and Michelle take over and do their intros and get right to it.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Renee, and I am part of Team Rise. So I just want to take a moment to talk about our team and what we did here. So I'm going to start things off with a poll. And the first thing that I want to run here is I would like to know, have any of you built any courses in Rise? So our team is built on the foundation of Rise from Articulate Rise as a course authoring. So that's where our name comes from. And I'm going to take a moment to introduce myself and my co-presenters here. Hello, I'm Renee Johnson. And on behalf of Team Rise, I just want to thank the Learning Guild, Lawrence Learning, and of course the xAPI cohort for hosting this event and inviting us to share our project here. A little bit about me. I have been in learning and development for, over 30 years. I currently am working at Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi. I work for a division, a research division, where I'm developing e-learning for UA pilots. And that's part of what brought me into joining the cohort, because I wanted to be able to use and learn how to use xAPI data to run a lot of the research that I plan to do. So I'm just at the start of my PhD program, and I just want to say what I've learned in this cohort so far has been phenomenal to help me get to my next level to conduct research. So next, I want to introduce our other co-presenter here, and that's Leah. Leah, you want to take a second to come on and introduce yourself? And I think I'll go ahead and close out our poll.
Absolutely. Thank you, Renee. So my name is Leah Kronick. I am an instructional designer, or at my company, my actual title is learning designer. I work for Travelers, and I have been in my current role for just over a year. And prior to that, I worked in higher education for about 10 years at the University of Minnesota. So recently joined the instructional design field, and also recently joined my current company, my current role. And in terms of my sort of background with xAPI, or my reason for joining the cohort, I have, I would say, some limited experience with xAPI coming into the cohort. It's something that I was interested in sort of getting a better understanding of, and hopefully sort of expanding the capabilities that we currently have. So I joined the cohort, and as a result of that, I ended up joining this project, which, as Renee mentioned, is Team Rise. And so we'll get into a little bit more about our project and sort of what we have been working on. But before we do that, I will pass it over to Michelle, and she can introduce herself as well. Michelle, you're on mute.
Hi, my name is Michelle McCrory, and I joined Team Rise as a newbie. I am relatively new to xAPI, and I really didn't know anything about it. But this is like the best way to learn something about it. It's just to dive in and, get your feet wet and join a team. And I've really enjoyed it. The team I'm working with, they're awesome people. They have a lot of experience where um, my experience has mainly been in the education field. So this is something that uh, I've been doing for a relatively short time compared to the rest of my cohorts members. And I just feel real privileged to be a part of the team. And I'll be monitoring the chat today. So if you have any questions, you can put in the Q&A, or you can, if you type it into the chat, make sure you put a Q, and that would really help me out. So.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. So I want to talk just a little bit about Team Rise here. So, of course, our presenters here were part of Team Rise, but our entire membership was about 57 people, and that's based off of how many people joined in our Slack channel. We had maybe 17 active members, with probably our core membership being a little bit closer to, I don't know, I'd say maybe about 8 or so. So, next thing we're gonna do is Leah is going to go over some of our project goals and our objectives and what we wanted to accomplish for our team.
Yeah, thanks, Renee. So this is maybe a good moment to mention our fearless leader, Becky Goldberg, who is, I believe, I don't think she's on the call, but if she happens to be on the call, shout out to Becky. So Becky really was the one who sort of had the idea of doing a project around the sort of interconnectedness of RISE and xAPI. Anyone who knows the sort of current state of those two tools and how they work together knows that there are some limitations as far as what you can currently do. And so, really, probably our biggest kind of major goal was to figure out a way to enhance the courses that we're creating in RISE as far as what they can do when it comes to xAPI reporting. Um, so that was probably our biggest goal. Part of that, the way that we sort of ended up going about that, I guess, is to develop a JavaScript wrapper plugin, which would allow for additional kinds of statements to be sent from RISE using xAPI that are not currently available. And we'll talk more about kind of where we're at with that process later on. And then a third goal, which is still also kind of in process, I would say, is to kind of try to suggest some of these types of enhancements to Articulate. So we're hoping that we can make this additional functionality available. And we're also hoping that we can sort of maybe convince slash gently pressure Articulate to try to incorporate some of the changes that we're working on developing. And then if we can go to the next slide, I will talk a little bit about process and methodology. Awesome. So, in terms of our process and our methodology, as Renee mentioned earlier, there were a whole lot of different folks from different backgrounds and different time zones, really all around the world, that were sort of lurking, quote unquote, in our project group in the cohort. So some folks who participated in weekly team meetings via Zoom. There was a core group of really probably about 6 or 8 individuals who generally participated in those meetings. Um, we tried to use our weekly meetings as a time to sort of delegate tasks for folks to do when we were not in the meeting. That didn't always happen. We also sometimes ended up, kind of doing more collaborative live work as well. But a lot of times we tried to sort of say, okay, here's the thing that you can do before next week's meeting. Here's the thing that I can do before next week's meeting, just because we had such limited time, and also because we were dealing with people being in various time zones and, working for different organizations and whatnot as well. We ended up using Google Drive for a lot of our collaboration and project management. So sharing documents, we created a poll there where people could sort of put in their information. We kept track of kind of who's doing what, and we took notes. Michelle actually was our very useful and dedicated note taker, so that if you missed a meeting, you could go back and see what you missed. We also obviously used the Slack channel that was sort of set up by the xAPI cohort for us. So we used that to participate, especially with our group members who were sort of further afield and maybe were not able to participate in those weekly meetings. And then obviously a lot of the actual development that we have done, and I would say are doing still, is being done asynchronously. So sometimes we had the opportunity to do stuff kind of live during our weekly meetings, but a lot of stuff was done kind of behind the scenes asynchronously. So from there, I'm going to pass it back to Renee, and she's going to kind of give a summary of the project that we did.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Okay, so for our project summary, I just want to give a brief overview of what our project all entailed. And most of that is that once again, like I said before, we created our course in using Articulate Rise, and then we published our course as xAPI. We ended up publishing it to AWS, which I'll get into a little bit more later. But one of the main points that we wanted to capture in our course is that we wanted to make sure that we were using, certain block types. And so you'll see in just a moment, I'll show you what that course is, and you'll have a chance to we're going to share a link with you. It's also in our resources. So on the right tab, if you're viewing this live, you'll be able to see it in the resources. You can go ahead and click on that, and it will take you into the course. I will say one thing: make sure that your pop-ups are not blocked. There's kind of a caveat to getting into the course, and we can get into that a little bit later. And then for capturing our learner data, we did use Watershed. As we got into capturing all of those xAPI statements and just checking out our learner progress. So, a summary of the technologies that we use, just so you can get a kind of big picture overview of what we have here. We do have Rise was the course authoring tool. We used AWS to host our course. In development still, we're going to get into a little bit of this is kind of the exciting part of the development of our project, is something we're calling this xAPI wrapper. So Leah's going to talk a little bit about that in more detail later. And then once again, Watershed as our LRS. So if you have your phone handy, you can go ahead and scan this QR code, and it will take you to our course. You are going to have to sign in with an email. That way, that's what gave us the user ID so that we could capture this. So also, I think Michelle's going to put the link in the chat just in case you can't access the resources link. So we'll have that there, and you can go in and take the course. So this will remain live even for weeks following the cohort. So if you're watching this in the replay, that's fine. And I just once again want to say, if you have any questions, feel free to pop those in the chat. If you want to use the Q&A, we're monitoring that as well. So let us know if. Okay, so I see some of you were saying access was denied. Interesting. Okay, we'll see if we can get that resolved and see if we can get the right link popped in there. So hold tight on that. We'll make sure that we get that to you at some point here. So if you can't get in there, no worries though, because here we have a little bit of an example of what our course looked like. So as you can see, one of the main components we wanted to use is, and this is the beauty of Rise too. So you can see I'm showing some examples here on the screen of the beauty of Rise is that it is a responsive course authoring tool. So you can take the course on web, mobile, tablet, computer, whatever. But we really wanted to capture those interactive blocks. And for me personally, when I'm designing with Rise, that's part of what I love about Rise is that you have these highly interactive and engaging blocks that you can use, but you don't have to build them from scratch. So it's great for highly iterative development where in a field like I'm in, you're constantly having to make something. And these are not courses that we can take a year to build. We need to be able to build them very, very quickly. So just kind of capturing that element from Rise, we wanted to figure out okay, so with these highly engaging and interactive elements, and this touches a little bit on what Megan was talking about in the last presentation. If you had the opportunity to watch that, it's like you have all this information that can come at you. So we wanted to build a very comprehensive course that shows all of the different types of those engaging and interactive elements that we could pull and measure data from. So, this is an example of just a few of what those were. I think when I counted, there was somewhere between like 10 and 15 different types of interactive elements that you can build. So, here's where we came into a little bit of a challenge that we had just as part of the cohort. So, normally, once you've developed a course and you know that you can publish it to your LMS as an xAPI published course, we had to figure out because in this cohort, we're not all working at the same organization. And we had some challenges that we had to overcome, kind of like what Leah was speaking about earlier. So here we had no common LMS. So normally what you would do is just go to Storm Cloud, right? Like that's the perfect testing kind of sandbox that you can use. However, our team was actually pretty large. So we wanted for everyone to have an opportunity to view the statements, especially those newer to xAPI who hadn't, like myself, who had never had any experience with that, we wanted to make sure that they could capture that. So with the, Swarm Cloud kind of free version, we had some limitations. So what we ended up doing is hosting the course on AWS, and this is kind of a good opportunity, I think, for us to ask, and you can just answer this in the chat if you're watching. We'd love to know what LMS are you using? And feel free to expand on some other LMSs, maybe not that you're using right now, but maybe LMSs that you've used before that can handle xAPI content. So we'd like to know that in the chat. Feel free to answer that for us. So once we figured out that we could use AWS to host the course, that's fine. But because it was public, we really didn't have a way to capture the user ID or what we would typically from an xAPI statement, this would be the actor. So we had to figure out a way for that. And some people on our team, luckily enough, had some experience with adding this to AWS. And I have a feeling that may be what's causing some of our problems getting into the course straight away. So we'll see if we can figure that out. Hard to figure that out live during a presentation, but we'll make sure that we get some links up there for you. So the next thing I want to share is once we had all those things figured out, we got the course published, we had some people that could go in and access the course and give us some learner data. We wanted to figure out what natively publishing via xAPI, what native information and data would we get to our LRS? And once again, we chose Watershed. I think some people on our team had some experience with that and set it up so all the rest of our team could go in and see the data that was coming in. So it was pretty cool that you could go in, take the course, see the data that you had populated and see what it looked like for you as a course participant. And this, what you're seeing on the screen here is just, I know it's maybe kind of hard to see on the tiny screen, but again, in the resources, you can see our full presentation. So if you want to open that later, you can look at these maybe a little bit more closely. But this is the extent of what we did. So in the last couple of months, in the last 12 weeks, we had a total of 736 interactive statements that were collected. And you can see just some of the breakdown. What we're looking at here is a little bit of the heat map. So I blurred out our users, but you can see how many each individuals is what you're seeing there in blue on the chart. So the next thing that we're going to do is go in a little bit deeper about what this data that we got means. And Leah's going to do just a little recap of our entire project and the milestones and kind of where we are here.
Thanks, Renee. As Renee mentioned,
Let's see, RISC, Meridian, Valamis, OnPoint, LearnShare. Many of the popular LMSs say they support xAPI, but are only supporting SCORM. That's kind of what we ran into with RISE. It's not really xAPI per se, like we would be seeing it.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
They recommend, let's see, it's Megan recommends asking vendors what, why, how they support xAPI, and to see examples or even let you test.
Yeah, it's not enough to just say we do xAPI, right? Because as anyone who has used Rise with xAPI knows, what's actually possible is pretty limited current state. So that's exactly why we're doing the project that we're doing. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the kind of major milestones. And as you can see, there are some things on here that we have already completed, and definitely some things that are very much in progress or not even started yet. So this is very much a work in progress. That's why we call it a case study, right? So we created our Rise course. We figured out a way to get it into a place where people were going to have access to it, which turned out to be AWS. We kind of level set as far as like what xAPI and Rise already do together, what is possible in the sort of current state. We got that data to report to Watershed, so we confirmed that we're getting things into a place where everyone is going to have access to what they need, and we're going to be able to see it and all of that. And we, in a minute, I'm going to show you our sort of xAPI wish list, if you will. But we definitely spent some time talking about and thinking about, blue sky, if you could have any sort of statement from a Rise course sent via xAPI, what would you want that to be? So we worked on that. And then this slide shows kind of the overview of what is currently possible with xAPI in Rise. And for those of you who are familiar, that there's not a lot of options. So you can see that a learner launched a course. You can see that a learner completed a course. You can see that they experienced a module. You can measure whether they passed depending on whatever the passing criteria is that you set, and currently that's kind of about it, really. Our project really was focused around that sort of blue sky wish list. What do we want to do? The next slide, if we could go to that, shows the actual raw learner data. So these are some examples. It looks like all of these are Renee. So Renee, you're a guinea pig. So some raw learner data as far as like, what are we seeing, what are we collecting, kind of making sure that we're all on the same page as like understanding what do these statements mean, what does it mean to say that Renee Johnson progressed, or that, you know, that she correctly or incorrectly answered, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of what that looks like, in case you haven't had a chance to see what that looks like. And then if we can go on to the next slide. So this is the one, and I realize that this is super duper tiny, but we're also going to post a link in the chat so you can see our shared Google Doc where we came up with this wish list. And as you can see, maybe you can read it at the top of the page. It says, "Dreaming of a world of xAPI from Rise." So we really tried to focus on, you know, in your job, in your life, whatever it is that you're using Rise and xAPI for, what would you want to see if you could see anything? So in terms of statements or data about what learners are doing and how they're interacting with courses and different kinds of content within courses, what would be, you know, your ideal? So what would you want to see if you could see anything? We did our best to try to kind of break things up into categories based on what type of content they would be interacting with. So, for example, we had a lot of wish list items around audio and video. So we wanted to know if the learner was pausing or repeating or skipping or buffering or all kinds of things that they might do with audio or video. We also had a number of items that were focused around quiz interactions. So more information about not just if they passed, but, you know, how long did it take them, and did they take it more than once? And one thing that I've run into in my work is limitations around eh, sort of getting only one passing score. So once you get a passing score, if you were to get a higher score after that, you don't get another statement. You just get it's still just passed. So wanting to have just more robust data around all different kinds of learner interactions within Rise. And Michelle, did you put that link in the chat? I was going to just double check and make sure that that's there. Yes, it looks like it is there. So
Yes,
if you
I
want to
did.
check
I
out
did.
if you want to check out the wish list items that we created, where you can actually see it, that is at that link in the chat to a Google Doc. And if for some reason you have trouble accessing that, please just let us know. So if we can go on to our next slide. So just to give kind of a recap of where we are now, and then we'll talk about sort of what's happening in phase 2, if we want to call it that. So we definitely spent some time figuring out how to work together and what the sort of cadence and collaboration of our group or our team was going to be. Not surprisingly, that is a challenge when you're working with people who have all different kinds of backgrounds and are all in, you know, different places and different kinds of organizations. We also work together to kind of level set as far as understanding what the current state is of the capability that exists with Rise and xAPI. So there were folks in the group who were super experienced with Rise but knew very little about xAPI. There were also folks for whom kind of the opposite was true. There were folks who knew a lot more than I do about a whole lot of things, and also folks who were brand new to kind of the whole idea of xAPI. So just kind of level setting as far as like what xAPI is, what Rise is, how they work together, and what we would want to see them do in the future. And then, as I just mentioned, we did come up with these sort of wish list items. Things that are currently in development, and this is, again, Becky Goldberg, our fearless leader, is continuing the work on this, and hopefully we'll have some updates for you. But we're working on coming up with a custom profile. So that would be a set of statements that are not currently possible within Rise. And the idea being that you could sort of get that whole profile and just kind of wholesale use it, and then you can, you know, decide which kinds of statements within that are important or useful to you. And as I think was briefly mentioned earlier, this JavaScript wrapper, which is really going to be the thing that sort of allows folks to actually, hopefully, use the functionality in the future. So that is something that is currently in development. And as soon as it is ready in some sort of, prototype state, we will definitely get it out there for folks to use it and try it out and collect feedback on it, which leads to our next slide. So we talked about where we are now, and then we'll talk a little bit about where we want to go. So as I said, the next piece is going to be some sort of prototype or proof of concept of this JavaScript wrapper that's going to allow us and you and hopefully a lot of people to kind of try it out and collect lots of data and lots of feedback and see what works and what doesn't. And obviously we'll need to do some tweaks and some revisions and whatnot. And then we would love to provide that as an open source tool that anybody can use. So, when it's kind of in a state where it makes sense for that to be possible, once we've hopefully kind of worked out some of the kinks and whatnot, we would love to make it available for folks to use. And, we can keep revising as needed, but we would love to make it possible for folks to really get in there. And then, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, eventually we would really like to kind of leverage whatever influence we might have with folks who are at Articulate and who can, maybe push the needle a little bit as far as actually incorporating some of this functionality into future, updates or versions of Rise. So that's obviously not something that's within our control as far as that, if that ever happens or not, but we would very much love to be able to see some of that additional functionality actually just integrated into the tool as it exists for everybody. So with that, I will pass it back to Renee, and she's going to talk a little bit about kind of what we learned from this whole process.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. So, some of the things that I want to talk about, first of all, I'd love to know of those of you who are viewing live in the chat, we want to know how many xAPI cohorts have you participated in? So, if you're watching this for the first time, you might say 0, you might have a 1. I know that we have at least 1 or 2 people on our team that have participated in, I don't know, like 6 or 7 different cohorts. So we'd like to know what your experience is participating with the cohort. And then we want to talk about a little bit how we learned working together within this cohort environment, some of the challenges that we had to overcome and some of the issues that we had. And again, once again, in the chat, if you have any questions or in the Q&A section, feel free to pop those in there. So one of the biggest challenges we had is that, of course, when you have a diverse team that comes from all different kinds of industries, all different companies, or I know that I noticed a lot of people in the cohort were freelancers or looking for work. So we also had a wide variety of people with different levels of experience with xAPI. I think at least half of probably our members had never really worked with xAPI and were in the cohort to dip their toes in the water and maybe hopefully by the end of it they've drunk the Kool-Aid and they're going to be champions for xAPI. And that certainly was my experience. So we did have some technological challenges we needed to overcome. For example, when you have people that work in a very strict environment, like that have to work through VPNs and their browsers are kind of on lockdown, we had to figure out how can we collaborate and work together as a team if we're not even in the same environment. So you saw some of the different tools that we ended up using, and some of those are the reasons that we had to choose the tools that we used just so that we could accommodate the most people. We also had people from different time zones. We had a fairly international team. So we had people that I think we had a couple of people that were in Europe. Maybe I think we had at least one user that was in India. So That also was a challenge. How can we figure out when to meet when we're in 5 or 6 different time zones? How do we figure that out? So that was a little bit of a challenge as well. And then I think a couple of the lessons that I learned would be, if I like, maybe going into the next cohort, would be to establish a little bit more of a structure for the team to figure out who's gonna be kind of our leader for certain areas of the team. What project management skills do people have? And we did address that somewhat at the very beginning. We asked everyone, "What are your skill sets?" So we could figure out who needs to do what. And then I think one thing that maybe we missed the mark on that we didn't ask people is, how much time do you have each week to devote to working on the cohort? So that would maybe be one more thing that I would ask. And then, of course, this is all a volunteer project, right? Where this isn't a work assignment. So, how do we manage accountability when someone says they're going to do something and maybe it doesn't get done, or it takes a little bit longer, or they have a heavier workload and so they can't quite contribute as much as they thought they might be able to? So, those are some of the lessons that we learned. I guess I'll invite Leah and Michelle if there's anything that maybe I missed that they would want to add to that before we start to really just ask a few more questions of our audience and open up the floor. Leah, anything else you want to add? Like any lessons maybe that you learned through your experience in working with the cohort?
Yeah, I one thing that we talked a little bit about this when we did our sort of share out at the last meeting of the xAPI cohort. I think one thing that I learned is just that even though I think the topic of xAPI can be sort of intimidating, for folks who maybe don't have a ton of experience with it or don't have a super, grounded understanding of what exactly it is and how it works. I think one thing that I learned is just that we all were able to sort of contribute, and I firmly believe that one of the most important jobs on the team was just the job of being the asker of questions. And so folks who, asked for clarification or asked for examples or asked for explanation of things that maybe aren't, just maybe not the kind of thing that you should assume that everyone understands. And, because we did have such a wide variety of folks participating, I think that that became a really important aspect of the project, was just like getting everybody on the same team and on the same level as far as what we were there to do and what we wanted to achieve. And it worked out really well to have that variety that we had. So I think it really turned out to be an asset. Anything else that you would want to add, Michelle, as far as what we learned?
Sure, yeah. I was probably the one that asked the most questions because I'm a walking question mark anyway. And so if I don't know something, I'm not afraid to ask. That's just how I am. So, yeah. And it was really, I learned a lot I learned how to do, this type of thing from Renee. She does this, this is what she does. I learned a lot about, what questions to ask. I don't think if you're just a lurker and you hop from team to team, you really don't get to know the people in it. So one thing I would totally recommend is joining a team, even if you don't know anything, because you will learn something and you can contribute. I took notes. I helped with the presentation, some of the handouts that we have posted. Even though, and I would appear when, Karen would say, "Does anyone want to talk about your team?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'll show up and I'll talk about it." So even though I didn't know, I felt like I was a talking head, just repeating what was at the meeting. But I actually did learn a lot. So just getting in there and participating really, really does teach you a lot.
I think you bring up a really good point, Michelle, because that was my instinct was to just be a lurker, and honestly, I was a lurker in a couple of other teams as well. But because this one was set up, this team already existed when I went to join, and because I use Rise in my course development, it certainly piqued my interest. And I kind of thought, okay, I just want to dip my toes in. I don't want to dive in too deeply, but then I realized almost immediately that if I really wanted to get the most out of this cohort, I needed to dive right in. So that's part of what how my involvement evolved, because I don't have any experience with working with API with xAPI before this. I did, however, have a lot of experience with Rise, so I volunteered to build the course. And by the way, I just want to kind of mention this. I didn't mention it before. The course is nothing special. This is strictly a demo course because I said, look, I only have a short period of time to do this. So I just threw something really, really quickly together, because the course development isn't something that we really cared about here. It was just getting as many of the kind of blocks that we could capture information from as quickly as possible so that we could, do the hard stuff in analyzing what we were getting. So again, the course part wasn't anything super special. So, yeah, I agree with that advice, Michelle. I think it's okay to lurk if that's what you're there to do. And I think all of those questions that Michelle had were probably the same questions that so many people other had, and maybe just didn't want to answer, or didn't want to ask. So yeah, I would say dive in, jump right into any team and do what you can. We needed everyone's participation to be there to manage whatever it was that we were doing, and just help everybody figure out how to work together and collaborate. So I want to take just a moment to ask, our audience, are there any questions? And Michelle, feel free to jump in if there. I know that someone was saying we need to get access to the course. I think we've maybe had a little bit of an issue with the link that was shared. So we'll
Yeah,
see if we can get, we'll see if we can get the appropriate link in there. By the way, with the published presentation link, we'll go in and update that. So when we update it, the presentation link should show the correct one when you want to try to do it that way. So we'll try to see if we can get that fixed for sure. Also, in the Slack channel, if you have access to the Slack channel, you should be able to get to it from there.
The link that is, there's something wrong with the link, in that it can't find the document or something like that. So what I did is I made a copy of our course. It's just a demo course, but we can't harvest any data from it because it's not linked to the LRS, but I did post a copy of the course that we used in case you're interested. It just has a lot of the blocks that Rise uses. As you know, that it's a rapid development tool. There's not a lot of customization to it. You have to kind of, know the inside stuff to make it, look like it's a custom course. But if you look at Rise, there's several different interactive blocks, and we just wanted to see what we could get out of it by having an example of each one. So that link is in the chat to the demo course. That is not, it's just a copy of the original course. It's not attached to the LRS.
Yeah, basically that one just takes you into the regular preview. So we won't be able to capture any data if you use that link, but it'll let you go in and see what the course looks like for sure. So I'm not sure I'm seeing too many other questions there. So I do want to let you know that this presentation is in the resources. If you want to scan it, you can grab it from your phone if you want to go back and review any of that content. And I also just want to give a really big shout out to all of our team members that kind of consistently contributed. Personally, I want to thank Becky, who's not joining us today, but if you want to connect with any of us, these are links to our LinkedIn profile. So if you have any questions that maybe come to mind a little bit later, feel free to connect to any of us. Again, if you use the presentation link, you'll be able to come back and revisit these and connect with us. But Becky had participated in many cohorts, and I believe she even was part of kind of the foundation and building of the set of standards and the specifications back to 8 to 10 years ago, something like that. So she really was instrumental, I feel like, in getting us started with our project and figuring out what we want to do. And we do plan to continue on and continue working on what we've been building here. So with that, I just really want to thank everyone for tuning in. Thanks to my co-presenters and everyone who participated on the team, whether it was doing some of the work, contributing just to the learner data, asking questions, giving us feedback, whatever it is. I just want to say thank you. Anything else?
Hey, yeah, I have a question that just popped up.
Sure.
Abdullah, that is a link to our original wish list that we had sent out to the people in our team because we wanted to see what kind of data we would want to work on to harvest from the course we were working on, the statements and the verbs and all the things that we had to figure out. We started out with that just to see what we would want to know, like how many times someone visited a video or how long did they stay on a page or that type of thing.
Yeah, and that's definitely a work in progress. So we're going to continue to work on building that, and hopefully it'll be something that, in the not too distant future, we can integrate directly into Articulate, and hopefully we've informed maybe some of their decisions to let them know what's needed, in the field. So with that, Leah, anything else you want to add before we sign off here?
I'll just mention that we're going to be at a table, and if you have any other questions or just want to chat about the project or what have you, you can come join us there.
Yes, absolutely.
You guys
We'll
did
stick
it all.
around for we'll
Yeah,
stick around for about 15 minutes there.
Right. I don't have anything to add. You covered everything I was gonna toss out to the crowd. So thanks for doing my job. Well done. Thanks for all the deep dive into the work and how you did it, how you got it accomplished. I think it's inspiring to listen to for future cohorts and people trying to form teams. I think a lot of lessons learned there. So I appreciate hearing all of that. And thank you. And as noted, the three of you, at least, I believe, will be available at a table for the next 15 minutes until we move into our next session, which is going to be Dave Willingham. So you want to stick around for this one, a blended approach to leadership training using xAPI. So on that note, I'll see you all again at the top of the hour, and I will end this session and see you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.